The mining sector is often seen as a sunrise industry in South Africa, but there seems to be a decline in the gold sector, with job losses continuing unabated. In February, Evander Gold Mine warned of 1,700 job cuts. AngloGold is set to shed 2,000 jobs. So should South Africa be worried about the decline of the sector, and what can be done to boost it? To help us answer some of these questions, I'm joined by Gilmour, an investment analyst. Chris, thank you so much for coming through and talking to us. So Cyril Ramaphosa talks about mining in broad terms being a sunrise industry, but it seems for more and more workers in the gold sector, the sun is setting.
You've put it very well. That's precisely what's happening. Gold specifically, I think, is, if nothing happens, in other words, if we carry on doing what we've been doing for many, many decades, it's going to be a sunset industry. So if you take the gold industry in South Africa, if you go back 30, 40 years, it was by far the leading gold producer in the world, with over 1,000 tons a year. Now we're down to about number 7 in the world, with about 140 tons a year. So it's been steadily declining, and quite rapidly declining, in fact. And yet the great irony is we have some of the best reserves of gold anywhere in the world. Only Russia and Australia, I think, are bigger. So you have this terrible conflict. Yes, we've got the reserves, but we've mined them out at a very, very slow rate in recent years. And that's largely due to not putting in a lot of new technology. We're still using the same kind of technology, basically, that we were using in the 1950s.
We'll turn to the question of technology in a moment, but there's a figure that is cited by trade unions that says since 2012 in the gold sector we've lost some 70,000 jobs. That's a bloodbath. Is it really that bad?
It is, definitely. And again, if you go back quite a few decades, many, many more people were employed in the industry. And of course there's a multiplier effect, because there's so many families and the like that actually depend on this. So yes, there was a huge number of people. But again, because of the implementation of technology, because of the fact that many mines have gone out of business, because the gold price has been relatively static for quite some time now, and even with the rand being relatively weak, which means that the rand-dollar exchange rate goes weak, the dollar gold price stays where it is, it means you get more rands. But nevertheless, it's been very difficult times for the gold mining industry, and they've been forced to lay off, unfortunately.
But the particular, you mentioned the issue of the price of gold and the exchange rate of the rand, but there are other factors that are quite unique to our gold mining sector that make it even more difficult. Tell us about those.
We have some of the deepest gold mines anywhere in the world. Now, if you look at something like Western ultra-deep levels, down in the Free State and places like that, you're sending people down 3.5, 4.5 kilometers into the earth. That's not where a human being should be. You've got to have huge amounts of refrigeration. The costs are absolutely enormous. So if you compare that with open cast mining in many other countries of the world, there's very little cost involved, relatively speaking. So the costs have been increasing disproportionately higher. As far as the unions are concerned, they've been getting some very good wage increases, but it all adds to the kind of toxic equation that says, unfortunately, for many of these mines, they just can't absorb these costs any longer.
And our ore grades are not particularly that great in terms of the level at which we are mining?
They've been declining quite considerably. I mean, back in the 1980s, it wasn't uncommon to have grades of something like 7 or 8 grams per ton. Now you're lucky if you get 2.
Wow. So, Chris, this brings us to the question of, that unpopular question of automation. You were saying just a few minutes ago that, the levels at which mining of gold happens in this country are not levels of the earth where you should be sending human beings down. That's highly unpopular in this country with our levels of unemployment. Are we facing a situation where, whether we like it or not, the issue of automation is something we will have to consider and, in fact, possibly have to embrace, whether we like it or not?
You're right, it's something we will have to embrace. But having said that, many of our mines are not conducive to this. The guys at AngloGold Ashanti, for example, have tried it, and not particularly successfully. It just depends on the geology of the mine. Some mines you can do it quite successfully, others you can't. So if you take Goldfields South Deep, now there's a wonderful mine that's got very, very wide seams, and you can do that very, very successfully, and they've done it very successfully. But certain other mines, with their much narrower seams, the only way you can actually physically get the gold out of the mines is to go down there, put people in, bore into the rock, put explosives and blast. And it's a terribly archaic way of doing things. But unfortunately, the degree of mechanization that you can put into some of these mines is quite limited.
So what's the solution then? I mean, you are saying that we have some of the best reserves of gold that are still remaining out there, but difficult to mine. We need to have this kind of activity in our economy going to boost our economy. What do we do?
Many people will say technology will come up with the answer, and I'm sure it will. But I mean, guys like Neil Froneman at Sibanye has said that by 2033, that's 15 years away, most gold mines will be closed if we don't have the right type of technology. And as I said before, it's not just applying blanket technology to this. So I think what we're going to have to do in South Africa is develop our own homegrown technology. Along with the unions, you're going to have to embrace all of the different stakeholders and say, guys, if you actually want to have an industry that is actually going to be sustainable in years to come, given the fact that South Africa has got something like 6,000 tons worth of ore underground, you know, this can be a very sustainable industry, but you've got to have a meeting of the minds and everyone has got to play their part.
So just a broader picture then on mining, Chris, before I let you go. We've been going through the picture in as far as gold is concerned, but how are we looking in terms of our other minerals, in terms of platinum, for example? I know that we've got massive coal reserves, for example. But what's the state of play there in as far as the ability to continue to mine in a way that is sustainable in those sectors?
If you'd asked me that question 20 years ago about platinum, I'd have said platinum was in a far better place than it is today. But again, it's now looking very similar. It's going down a similar type of pattern. Again, it's deep level mining, so it's that much more difficult. You haven't got the ability to kind of mine those near the surface ore bodies. Coal is problematic because everyone's moving away from coal, apart from South Africa with Eskom. So, yes, we still have many other metals and minerals. I mean, this country is probably better endowed with a variety of minerals than any other country on earth. So, again, as I say, I think it's something that has to be viewed holistically from a variety of constituencies, because there is tremendous bounty to be exploited. But it can't be done by one sector of the community.
All right, Chris Gilmour, thank you so much for coming through and having this conversation with us. He is, of course, an investment analyst helping us unpack some of the developments we've been seeing in the mining industry.